that's exactly the type of conversation we need to have, and kind of leads us closer to putting together something that's well discussed and reviewed by everyone. So with that, let's move on to the next subgroup, which is barriers in technology. Mark, will you be taking the lead on that one?
I will. Thanks, Teddy.
All right, so I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Welcome back, everyone, from break. I acknowledge the work of our team, Dave Wolf, my co-chair, Steve Georgie, Jim Wycombe, Nolan Coffin, and the invaluable work of Cassie Lavelle, who is going to put up, share her screen, I believe, at this point, to show a little bit about what we've been doing. I'm quite certain we're going to have some good discussion on our recommendations as well, or at least I hope so, because we're going to look for that from you. But at a real high level, just to kind of tell you what we're doing, we're technology and barriers, and so we've broken it into those two parts, technology and the various, we're covering the various technologies that we have talked about as a group or that we know that exist. And while we do that, we cover fixed wireless and cable, DSL, fiber optic, and you'll see that scroll through, and I don't expect you to be able to read it right now. Mobile wireless, TV white space, and satellite. Those are the areas that we've chosen to cover, and if anybody thinks there's something missing there that we should talk about, you can mention that to us now or after we release this out, as Teddy talked about, getting this in everybody's hands. Please feel free to help us with that and to help us fill in gaps. Right now we have a lot of gaps and things missing in our discussion that we're going to add to over the next couple of weeks. But what we talk about in the technologies is we talk about what their capabilities are and what their limitations are, to try and let folks know what various technologies are able to do, what they potentially could do, and what some of the barriers and limitations that we see with that are. Then we also talk about our barriers section, where we talk a lot about what COVID has taught us in terms of speeds that are necessary to do the things, work at home, telemedicine, education, all the things we heard talked about when we were asking questions of the governor this morning. And then we get into some of the specific barriers that we've identified: mapping, leadership, easements, and broken down into sort of public right-of-way permitting, railroad permitting, things like that. Coordination with other state agencies, and we heard a little bit with Bernadine's group about some coordination that would probably be good. And you see we have a lot of bullet points still in some of these areas. Lack of digital literacy is a barrier, and we recognize that. We kind of didn't fully develop this section yet, as we were waiting to see if any of the other groups have dealt or are going to deal with digital literacy as an issue. And affordability is very definitely an issue as well. We're working really hard on access and getting access to everybody, but we know that affordability is a problem as well, and so we want to highlight that if none of the other groups highlight those as barriers. So that's a high-level look at what our group has been dealing with. We've put together quite a bit of information, but we have a little bit of work to do on that yet. So my team members, committee members, anybody want to say anything about those areas that I missed? Okay. Say I'm an educator, so I'm good with the wait time, but I'm also good at filling awkward silence. So thank you, everybody, for your work in that. And again, for the larger group, you'll have an opportunity, and please provide us feedback once we get this into everybody's hands, so that there are areas that we need to more fully develop or things that we've missed. We hear from you on that. So then on to the recommendations. And we have 3 large recommendations with a couple of examples under one of them, at least at this point. And we looked at them. We looked at policy and procedure recommendations. One of ours probably has a price tag because it's very similar to the Economic Development Digital Inclusion Group's recommendation, but our others are more around policy and procedure. And the first recommendation, and I'll go through each one of them, and then we'll open it up for your discussion one by one. Our first recommendation, the state of Minnesota must focus broadband investments on bringing services to the 157,000 rural households that are currently unserved. All future expenditures must be on service that meets or exceeds the 2026 speed goal of 100 megabits per second download and 20 megabits per second upload. And just to comment on that one is, you'll notice that we remove any reference to the 2022 speed goal because essentially that's a moot point at this juncture anymore. And so our emphasis there is to serve the unserved first, and to look ahead to the 2026 meeting or exceeding that goal. And we added exceeds, and we can talk about what that means. So you'll have an opportunity to provide lots of feedback there. The second recommendation, the state legislature should provide direct base funding to the Department of Employment and Economic Development and the Office of Broadband to assure the continued issuance of border-to-border broadband grants and to collect broadband mapping data at the address level as a requirement for any provider participating in the border-to-border grant program as an applicant or challenger. So a little change in policy there in the second part of that recommendation. And the first part of that recommendation in line with the previous group's recommendation. So we may have to change that a little bit to zero in on the part that's maybe more about barriers to us. Then the third recommendation, the Broadband Task Force, along with the Office of Broadband, encourages the engagement of state agencies to develop a strategy that will improve the communications between the agencies and private internet service providers, eliminate or minimize service interruptions, and will also consider a plan to connect the more challenging rural locations of Minnesota to assure Minnesota is a truly connected state. And a couple of examples under that would be, given the short construction season in Minnesota, the timeliness of the issuance of permits is critical. The state should convene a working group of all parties relating to broadband construction permitting to find ways to reduce the permitting process, both in the time to issue permits and the permit application process. And then a little comment about railroads. There needs to be more oversight of railroad facilities by the Office of Pipeline Safety. Railroads need to be required to locate their own facilities. In addition, railroads need to be encouraged to issue permits in a timely fashion. That's been a barrier to a number of projects in the state. So those are our three recommendations with a couple of sub-recommendations to one of them. And I'd love to hear your comments. And Teddy, do you have anything, or my group, anybody have anything to say to begin with?
Any comments from the subgroup? Okay, let's open it up to the larger task force.
Sure, and we take them one by one. The first one is the all future expenditures should be in service that meets or exceeds the 2026 speed goal and serving the unserved first. Comments and feedback there, we'd love to hear it.
Yvonne has a comment.
Yep. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Hi, this is Yvonne. On number one, the all future expenditures must be on service. I understand the reasoning in terms of timing. Is it possible to word it in such a way so that if the only way to serve an unserved area is to do it at lower than those speeds, it could still happen?
My comment would be, that's possible. That's certainly possible. Is that the desire of the group? Considering we have state statutory speed goals in play, and the statute says we need to serve all Minnesotans at that speed, is that counterproductive to word it that way? Would be my thought, my question for the group.
I'm just wondering about the, all or nothingness of that, and just raising that point.
Nope, that's certainly something we've discussed, Yvonne, for sure. And I guess, our group has settled on, and again, this is for the larger group to decide. Our subgroup has settled on the fact that we want to meet statutory requirements, and that it doesn't seem to be public money well spent to do a segmented sort of approach. that's just how our group has settled on it. But that doesn't mean that the larger group can't make changes to it. Brian, did you had a question, it looked like, or comment?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. One of the things that we have in our narrative that Steve threw together is that talking about technology neutral. I think that is something that we've discussed. That being able, you can meet the speeds that you need to. That's positive. And I think the other part of that is you had mentioned the speeds of 100 by 20. We will talk a little bit about that later on this afternoon in our discussion, because I think that the key focus that comes out of our committee is we need to serve all of the state of Minnesota before we change the rules, because we don't want people all of a sudden upgrading their broadband from 25.3 to get to 120 when you got some people in the state that no longer or still can't get the service. So that's what we're wrestling with, but from what we're seeing, most of the projects coming in are already at that level that you've listed there. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for those comments. And that is certainly what we were trying to reflect here was that idea that we do want to bring everybody forward. And at this point, when we're talking about statutory goals, we need to be focusing on the 2026 goal. And again, still keeping it technology neutral, but we understand that the faster the speeds, as we will outline in some of our discussion of the technologies, that does make it more difficult for some of the technologies. But Brian, you're absolutely right. All of the applications have been at that level, at least for sure in the last round. Bernadine.
Thanks, Mark. A quick question on the first one here about if there's a policy change implied in the first sentence about the 157,000 rural households that are currently unserved, that we should focus there. Is that a change, or what does the grant program currently say about on versus underserved and investments? Would this essentially then create a new sort of restriction then that in reviewing the grants, that all the applications that went to unserved would take priority over underserved? And is that a change in what the statute currently says, or the grant program guidelines?
Yeah, so Bernadine, thanks for bringing that up. I think in our view in the working in the subgroup was that is our desire. Our desire is to focus it on those unserved locations. And I'll ask Angie or Diane if they would comment. I think that my thought is yes, it is a change in priorities for the broadband grant program, but I'll let Angie or Diane maybe give a comment on that.
This is Diane. Currently, we award slightly higher points to applications coming from unserved areas. We also, however, do recognize that sometimes to get to that unserved area, you go through an underserved area, and you may want to include some of those underserved locations in your project since you're passing right by. But we do give additional points for applications from unserved areas right now. We also have the requirement.
Thank you for that, Diane.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, we also have the requirement in statute that we have to geographically disperse the grants across the state. So it is possible that there could be an entirely underserved grant application that would get funded because we needed one in that geographic area of the state.
And Diane, tell me the geographic distribution piece. Is that a policy thing? Is that a statutory thing?
That's in statute that we are to try and achieve dispersion across the state with the awards, and we do that.
Okay, thanks. No, thanks for that clarification. And I'm, Certainly, there's still plenty of places all over the state that are unserved, so I don't think that's necessarily an issue. But
So thanks, Mark. My point was that if currently under the way the program's administered, unserved is prioritized. It sounds like it is through points. Would we be cutting our nose to spite our face kind of thing by unnecessarily restricting grant awards that would, in the end, get in the way of us being able to address unserved? If the program currently prioritizes unserved, are we really gaining anything by adding this focus? And what's the cost of that focus? So that's the question I would bring.
sure, and the group, thanks, Bernadine. The group can certainly comment on that. I just want to make known, Steve Fensky posted in the chat the statute that says that the commissioner shall give priority to applications that are constructed in areas identified as unserved. So that statutorily, that priority already exists. I think our point was to bring emphasis to it and say that this is so that people understand, the legislators understand the fact that we have 157,000 rural households that are unserved, and like I said, we say we must focus broadband investments. We don't say must limit broadband investments to those. So that's my comment on that. But the group has other thoughts, and please chime in.
Well, perhaps it's just a wording change then, something along the lines of, given that there are 157,000 rural households that are currently underserved, and it's an important mandate of the legislation, blah, blah, blah.
Thank you for that, Yvonne. We will, I know that Cassie's taken notes, so we'll talk about that for sure at our next meeting. Paul, I think I see a hand up.
Yeah, I just, the notion that, I know we've tried to allocate grant funding to all parts of the state, but that seems to me as more of a political accommodation as opposed to what we should really drive for is getting that 150,000 plus, served with getting them broadband service. We've had $80 million roughly allocated to the grant program. Why wouldn't we try to focus that, like laser focus on getting those areas served going forward because if you're trying to just throw some money into an area of the state just so you can say okay, we've gotten all parts of the state, some community is going to suffer in that grant program because they didn't get the funding for a program because it had to be given to Southwest Minnesota or Southeast Minnesota, what have you. Just seems like something, I don't know if that's just a policy thing or a statutory thing, but something possibly we ought to consider.
Thanks, Paul. So noted. I was writing notes while you were talking. We can take this all into consideration and see if we craft a slightly different statement. Steve.
Hey, on this, since the statute's been the same here for quite some time, and the outside groups, the community groups struggle with this too. I'd rather leave that language as it is because it gives the chances, I think as Diane was mentioning, it favors unserved, and that's part economic. ISPs at the start of this program said, well, we just can't go to those places. It's not feasible. That's less so with underserved. But as Diane mentioned, it gives this chance where if they go by underserved places to get to unserved, they still have a possibility of getting the award. So I feel like this is a fine balance, and I don't want to change it.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve, for those comments. Any others on this? Any other comments on this this recommendation?
So, Mark, one thing I would say is, one of the things that we heard from the governor earlier was to be clear where the dollar should go, and I think you guys are saying this is where it should go, right? But in the larger narrative, I think it'd be good to identify where those 157 households are right? Not specifically, but like these counties or this part of the state, et cetera. I think that would be useful, even as we talk about 157. Here's where they are. It's just part of the larger documentation that we can give to the governor and to the legislature.
Thanks, Teddy, for the comment. I'm going to ask a question on that because that brings up a question we had as a subgroup. So is there going to be a section, an introduction, anything in the final report that has sort of the current mapping? So the 157,000 number comes from the most recent mapping, and Diane had shared that with us at our last subgroup meeting. Is there going to be a section that does that, which would then highlight that, or is that something we should include in our section? That's just a question.
It's a good question. My initial reaction would be put it in your section, and
Okay.
then and as a group, if we want to elevate it and put it more into the main body, we can absolutely do that. But at least we have a place where we can pull it from, right?
Yep. Okay. And I see Steve Fensky says their draft includes some of those maps too. So we'll figure that out. I thank you for that clarification, though. That'll help, and we'll get that all worked out then, for sure. All right. Any last call for the first one? Otherwise, we got two more. All right. Second one. Direct base funding to the Department of Employment and Economic Development, which I think is the same idea as with the previous group. And then to assure the continued issuance of border-to-border broadband grants and collect broadband mapping data at the address level as a requirement for any provider participating, et cetera, et cetera. So perhaps the second part of that recommendation is different. You've heard so far this morning. So thoughts, comments on that? Okay, I'm looking for hands raised. I don't see any, so if you did and I don't see it, chime in. All right, that one was easy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think we're good, Mark.
All right. My wait time was sufficient. All right. And then the third one, the encouragement of state agencies to develop a strategy to improve communications. We talked about communications earlier in the meeting between the agencies and private service providers. And we had a couple of examples there. Getting convening a work group to talk about permitting and finding ways to reduce time and issues with permitting process, and then the railroad piece. Your thoughts and comments. Paul has the first shot.
I did have a question with respect to the area of eliminate or minimize service interruptions. Are you talking about broadband service? This strikes me as a little bit of backdoor regulation, and the state does not have a role in regulating broadband providers, personally, nor should they. I'm just kind of interested in that element of. I like the permitting thing, the railroad thing. That's always been a challenge for providers, but this service interruption. We have the PUC, we have the Department of Commerce. Where are you going with that? Just kind of curious.
I am going to defer to maybe Dave or another member of our group who probably knows more about this than I remember.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. When we were putting that together, we were referring to the state of Minnesota fiber that rides down I-94 that a lot of connectivity is sourced through. If the state works on that cable and doesn't tell anyone about it, you get pretty large outages in portions of the state. What we were hoping for is better coordination between the state and service providers and people that depend on that utility. I realize the PUC is there and other agencies, but we're talking about just general notification that there's going to be a resplice or a cut or something with that state-owned facility.
That clarifies that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. How could we word that better, Paul, to meet your concern?
Yeah, I maybe instead of eliminate or minimize service, maybe it's not the word service, but it's, I have to think about that. But minimize cable, cuts or cable disruptions or something of that nature.
Sure.
I know exactly what you're getting at, because we've all been victim to those calls that usually come on Friday afternoon on a beautiful weekend that, we've got a major cable cut and it's, contractor X that didn't notify us or something like that. So, yeah, I get exactly what you're driving at.
So, and thanks, Paul, for the comments. And if you think of another way to word it, just, send that to Dave or I or both or whatever. And we'd be happy. And we've, again, taken notes. And so we'll put our heads together on that too. So I understand that question. I'm glad we got some clarification for you. Teresa, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing that Paul was saying as far as service interruptions. Fiber cuts are horrible. We had one yesterday. It was due to locates or mislocates, and it takes the technicians forever because they have to splice fiber back together. And so that just needs to be rewarded. So I'm just echoing what Paul was raising, because the way it looks now, it's not reading correctly. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Teresa. And again, let everybody know if you suddenly think of something that you go, oh, hey, this would work, let us know, because we want to try to get that in there and get that right to reflect the group for sure. Steve, do you have a hand up?
Too many mutes. The permitting issue. I'm curious what that means. If this is a direction of bypassing local governments, that is going to be an issue for those local governments. As right of way is one of the primary things they regulate, and there's a lot going on there. To give you an example, in townships where a lot of this stuff is going to go, 55,000 miles of road, and probably over half of that, no one really knows where the right of way line is. So you really need to work with the local officials to try and figure out where are you allowed to go before everybody starts trespassing. That one, I'm kind of curious what this work group would do and what the conclusions would be, but I can tell you, you'll run into issues if it's any kind of preemption or setting a standard, statewide for all rights of way. And with railroads, I suspect would be a similar issue.
Dave, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're looking for is maybe a clearinghouse to speed up the process, not circumvent the process. I know in 2016, Governor signed a law standardizing procedure and pricing for utility crossings for railroad facilities, and that's great, but we're certainly not there yet. And having a venue that maybe would bring a number of entities together to help them solve the efficiency in that permitting process, whether it be for railroads or DOT or DNR or pick your agency. It should be nice because the construction season is so short, and if we speed up the cable placement process, it's going to put more burden on that permitting process, which could inadvertently slow down or derail the ability to get some dollars in the ground. So, I'm open to rewriting that to however it could be suggested, but I'll pause for a moment.
Brian, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's one that I'd like to look at a little more. I think there's maybe an opportunity with existing easements that we can try to reduce the amount of legislative burden for providers to install broadband. and maybe build on that. So maybe there's some resources I could even pull and shoot your way to Mark.
That would be outstanding. Thanks, Brian, for the comment and for help. Dave, any more follow-up?
No, I think we're, we had some good momentum on this part of it 3-4 years ago, and it's kind of stalled out a bit. And understanding that this Herculean effort of building to 157,000 unserved homes is going to require a lot of facility. And to get that facility in the ground, we're going to have to true up or speed up the permitting process or improve it.
That information as well for our discussion in our subgroup as we tackle these moving forward. Anything else on any of them? Something you thought of? Go back to the previous one. Give you one more shot.
So Mark, this is Teddy. One thing I'd say is, on the second one, you said the initial part was kind of what we had already heard, and kind of probably is in the Minnesota model one, as we'll talk about here in a second. I think for the moment it's fine. As you get access to the other working groups, then you can modify so there's no duplication, right? And we just keep the piece that's unique here. That would be my only recommendation there.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. I think that's thank you everybody for that discussion and for the assistance and wording for some of those, and we'll be back to you with some revised recommendations and content in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, rest of the team. This is good discussion, good clarifications in there, and that's exactly how this process should work. And again, once we get the full documents and we can have time to digest and have more comments and recommendations or suggestions. So, but the initial point here was to introduce them and have this sort of initial reactions and discussion. So it looks like we have a few minutes. I don't know that we have enough time to start the next one. So what I would like to do now, though, is Yvonne, I think you are now able to get yourself off mute. So maybe you want to just do a quick introduction of yourself and a little bit of background there.
Hi, everyone. It's Yvonne Caribon. If you want the correct pronunciation of it, I don't mind if it's pronounced a different way, though. 27 years ago, I started one of the first internet service providers in the country. It was called Internet Connections out of Mankato. My husband and I founded the company because we wanted our kids to be able to talk to kids from everywhere around the world. We still had books in the library that had East and West Germany in them. We were sort of appalled by that. We loved the idea that our kids could talk to kids in West Germany and East Germany. Also, as a small business person, my parents are entrepreneurs. I grew up with entrepreneurs. I love the idea that people from Mankato and surrounding towns could sell their products anywhere. So that's why we started the company. 27 years later, I mentor student entrepreneurs at Minnesota State University Mankato. I'm the director for the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship there. And my primary job is to help students start companies. I also teach a course in entrepreneurship and project management. Try to encourage the kids to think about living in rural Minnesota. A lot of them have similar complaints, things like broadband, healthcare, stuff like that. I applied to be on the task force because, like all of you, I really believe in this idea of border-to-border broadband. I'm excited about the idea. I used to be on task force and conferences about broadband back in the early 90s, so this feels like I'm coming back full circle. And maybe perhaps being part of a team that helps to bring this to fruition. So I'm excited about that. And I'm very pleased to meet all of you. I'm a bit intimidated, but I will do my best to pitch in and help wherever I can.
Yvonne, thank you very much for that introduction. And I clearly have a passion for this, and you've had a passion for this for a number of years. So we're excited to have you on the task force, and you've already you're already contributing right from the very first meeting before the introduction. So we truly appreciate you being here with us. Kind of based on my discussions with Yvonne and sort of preferences, and also looking at the composition of our task force, she will be working on the economic development and digital inclusion working group, because that seems to be the area that she has expertise, passion, and again, we were a little light there anyway before. So So that's that, and again, welcome to the task force. So it's 11:47 now. Like I said, it's probably not enough time to get started on the next piece, so we'll just take a longer lunch. So let's do this. We can take lunch now. It's 11:47, and then we'll come back at 12:30 to start back up our session, if that's okay with everyone.